Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to turn your post notifications so you don't miss any of our new videos. My name is Sam, and I have the strange ability to travel through time. However, there is one major limitation. I can only go backwards, never forwards. It all started on my 30th birthday when I suddenly found myself transported a week into the past. At first, I was confused and terrified, convinced I was losing my mind. But then I realized I could use this gift to change things, to try and make the future better. That first trip, I went back and decided to play the lottery. Sure enough, when the numbers were drawn, I won. I was ecstatic until a week later when I re-experienced my original timeline and had not played the lottery at all. It seemed my trips to the past didn't actually change the future. They just created alternate realities. But I was determined to find a way to use this ability for good, even if it was in another timeline. From then on, I started carefully documenting my trips, taking detailed notes of events so I could try altering small things and see how the outcomes differed. It was fascinating to observe the butterfly effect in action. One time I went back and was nicer to a stranger, and in that timeline, they went on to become my friend. Another trip, I decided to take a different route to work and ended up missing a terrible car accident. Through trial and error, I learned that large changes often had unintended consequences, so small nudges tended to work better. My greatest success was stopping a terrorist attack. I remembered seeing news reports about a bomb going off in a busy downtown area, killing dozens. So 1 week before the date, I traveled back and discreetly called in an anonymous tip to the police. Sure enough, they found the bomb in time, and no one was hurt. That was incredibly rewarding, knowing I saved lives, even if in an alternate reality. I wished more than anything I could share my experiences with someone, but of course, no one would believe such a fantastic claim. The isolation was starting to take its toll. One rainy night, I was walking alone, lost in thought, when suddenly I felt the now familiar pull of time travel. But this time was different. I ended up in the same place, just a few minutes earlier. To my shock and delight, I saw myself across the street. We made eye contact, and I just pointed to a quiet, nearby alley. Past me nodded in understanding and followed present me to talk. I finally had someone who knew my secret, someone I could confide in. We traded stories of our time trips, bouncing ideas off each other. It was such a relief to not be alone anymore. From that point on, past me and present me worked as a team. We developed strategies, testing theories about what could and couldn't be changed. We started focusing our trips on specific goals, like preventing accidents or cures for diseases. With two of us, we were able to have a much bigger positive impact. However, the more we traveled, the more the effects seemed to accumulate. Small paradoxes started appearing, like familiar faces in places they shouldn't be, or strange déjà vu. We realized messing with timelines too much risked damaging the fabric of reality. We decided our final mission would be to travel as far back as possible, to a pivotal moment in history, to try altering the course of humanity in a big way. After months of preparation, past me and present me said our goodbyes, not knowing if we'd end up in the same reality again. I focused all my energy and felt the pull back decades, further than I'd ever gone before. When I opened my eyes, I stood in awe at the bustling streets of ancient Rome. This was it, our chance to change the future. I just hoped the consequences of such major meddling wouldn't have disastrous, unforeseen effects. But I had to try, for the sake of all those who could benefit. My journey through time was only beginning. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The streets of Rome were bustling all around me, people shouting in Latin as they bartered goods and went about their daily business. Soldiers marched by, the clanking of their armor loud, even over the din of the crowds. This was one of the most powerful empires in the world, at the height of its dominance. And I had to be very careful not to disturb the fabric of history too much. My plan was to try and influence some of the key political and military decisions that shaped the coming years. If I could nudge things in a direction that avoided major conflicts or spread ideas of tolerance and human rights earlier, it might change the entire trajectory of Western civilization. But I had to proceed cautiously. I didn't want to accidentally assassinate someone or cause a war by a misplaced word. Information was power, so I started by listening more than speaking, learning all I could about the major players and their motivations. After a few weeks of discreet observation, I identified a senator named Marcus Tullius Cicero as someone who might be open to new perspectives. He was already known as a philosopher and supporter of Republican principles. When I had the chance to bump into him after a Senate meeting, I respectfully brought up some of his published works to start a dialogue. To my delight, he was intrigued by my knowledge and eager to discuss philosophy and governance. Over many conversations, I began gently seeding ideas, pointing out how tolerance of differing beliefs could strengthen Rome rather than weaken it. Cicero proved a thoughtful sounding board. To my joy, some of the concepts I introduced, like separation of church and state or emphasis on individual liberty, began appearing in his later writings and speeches. I could see the ideas spreading and taking root, but I knew meaningful change would take generations, not months or years. And I was acutely aware of how precarious my situation was. One mistake, and I risked erasing my own existence. I had to be extremely judicious about what interventions I attempted. For now, influencing thinkers like Cicero seemed the most impactful strategy without unintended blowback. My goal was planting philosophical seeds that might blossom into a more just society down the line. But I would have to stay vigilant and nimble, adapting my approach as the political tides in Rome ebbed and flowed. My journey to shape the future had only just begun. My discussions with Cicero continued to be fruitful, and I was heartened to see the ideas of liberty, justice, and human rights gradually spreading through Roman intellectual circles. However, the political situation in Rome was becoming increasingly unstable. Julius Caesar's rise to power threatened to upend the Republic, and I knew the coming civil war would plunge the empire into chaos.
As much as I wanted to avoid interfering directly in events, I felt I had to take action to try and avert the catastrophic conflict that was coming. In a private meeting with Cicero, I cautiously shared some of my knowledge of what was to transpire if Caesar continued unchecked in his bid for control. I urged Cicero to rally moderates in the Senate against Caesar's ambitions and suggested compromise and reconciliation wherever possible to prevent a split. Cicero took my warning seriously. He redoubled his efforts to find a political solution and avoid open war. For a time, it seemed violence might be averted, but Caesar's hunger for power and the intransigence of his opponents could not be overcome through diplomacy alone. On the Ides of March, As Caesar prepared to cross the Rubicon River and ignite civil war, I made the difficult decision to take matters into my own hands. Under cover of darkness, I stealthily made my way to Caesar's camp. His guard was minimal. No one anticipated danger so close to victory. In his tent, I found Caesar alone, poring over maps and plans by lamplight. Before he knew what was happening, I grabbed him from behind and clamped a cloth soaked in sleeping draught over his mouth. As he slumped unconscious, I felt a surge of guilt and horror at what I had done. But I steeled my resolve, knowing that sparing one man could save thousands from dying in war. I left Caesar there alive, but removed him from the equation. By morning, his absence would sow confusion in his ranks, perhaps giving Cicero one last chance for reconciliation. I could only pray that history would view my actions, however extreme, as ultimately saving Rome from itself. My work to shape a more just future was not yet done. My interference had the desired effect. Without Caesar there to cross the Rubicon, his legions hesitated to march on Rome. Cicero seized the opportunity to broker an emergency accord between the Optimates and Populares factions before violence could erupt. It was a fragile peace, but it held, preserving the Republic. In the ensuing years, the ideals of liberty, civic duty, and human rights that I had discussed with Cicero took deeper root in Roman philosophy and governance. Rome avoided the turmoil and dictatorship that marked Caesar's rule in the original timeline. The empire remained a republic longer, developing democratic traditions that would later influence the founding of modern democracies. Slavery was gradually reformed, and concepts of equality before the law began taking shape. Conquest still expanded Roman dominion, but with less bloodshed under the republican system. Overall, the changes set Western civilization on a path toward greater justice and liberty much earlier. As for me, I never saw Cicero or Rome again after that fateful night with Caesar. Once I had set the major divergence in motion, I felt the familiar pull of time travel and found myself returned to the present day. But it was not the present I had left. Everything was subtly different, reflecting the impact of the altered past. Most remarkably, the date was nearly 2 centuries later than expected. My actions in Rome had so significantly changed the trajectory of history that I had skipped forward almost 2 centuries into this new timeline. I was overjoyed to see how far societies had progressed without the turmoil of Caesar's rule. Democracy, abolition, universal rights were all much further developed. Medicine, science, and living standards had also advanced remarkably. It seemed my gamble to shape the past for a better future had paid off beyond my wildest dreams. As for my time travel ability, after so many trips back, it seemed to have burned itself out. But I did not mourn its loss. I had used the power well to help humanity, and I was content to live out the rest of my days in this more just world that was partly of my own making. My journey through time had come to an end, but the ripples of change would echo through the centuries to come. I felt I had fulfilled my purpose.